Good.
So and I think I have to be turned on, don't I?
I think he's going to turn us. You can turn us. He's going to turn us on now.
He can do it from there.
Is it on? Okay. Good evening. My name is Laura Ettinger, and I am a history professor here at Clarkson University. And I would like to welcome you this evening. First, I would ask that all of you make sure and turn off your cell phones, please. This is being taped for later broadcast as part of North Country Matters, which is a television series on WCKN, so we prefer not to have cell phones going off during that. I am very honored to introduce and interview Congresswoman Constance Morella this evening. Congresswoman Morella has had a long and very successful political career. She served in Congress representing Maryland's 8th District, the first woman to hold that seat, from 1987 to 2003. Congresswoman Morella is a moderate Republican who often voted her conscience rather than the party line, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that more later this evening. Since leaving Congress, Morella has served as ambassador to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. She did that from 2003 until 2007. She has won many, many, many awards, including Outstanding Public Service Awards from groups as diverse as the American Medical Association, the American Bar Association, the Hubert H. Humphrey Civil Rights Award, and I could keep going. Congresswoman Morella's visit to Clarkson is being sponsored by a variety of groups here on Clarkson's campus. The sponsors are the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and a student group called Spectrum. In addition, Congresswoman Morella's visit is being sponsored by the St. Lawrence County branch of the American Association of University Women, as well as the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters. Congresswoman Morella is here in the North Country because she is a Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellow at St. Lawrence University, and we're lucky enough to get her to come to Clarkson for the evening. As I said, this event will later be broadcast on the North Country Matters, as part of the North Country Matters television series on WCKN. Let me now explain briefly the format of tonight's event. I am going to interview Congresswoman Morella for about 30 to 35 minutes, and then we will open up the floor to questions from the audience. And we have a master's student, Alan Shea, who's in the back, who's generously given his time to take questions from the audience. He'll have a mic so that he can hand that to you. So welcome, Congresswoman Morella.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you want me to stand?
No, we're good.
Okay,
we can stay seated. So I thought we'd start off by having you just tell us a little bit about where you grew up and just a little bit about what your parents did, what your childhood was like, what you were like, just a little bit about that kind of thing.
Well, first of all, I'm Connie Morella, and I approve this message. The message is, this is my first time at Clarkson University, and I'm very proud to be here and to learn more about your academic program, the leaders that you have here, your president, vice president, your faculty, and the fact that you're engaged particularly in science, engineering, technology, which is so very important. Your introduction of me was so very lavish, far more than was necessary, but it reminded me of something attributed to Mae West from silent movies. She said, too much of a good thing can be downright enjoyable. So I enjoyed every bit of it. It was lengthy, I did. So where did I grow up? I grew up not too far from here, just north of Boston in a place called Somerville, which I understand from a nice blue-collar area has become rather gentrified, particularly because of its proximity to Cambridge, Massachusetts. I am the daughter of immigrants. My parents, as little ones actually, came here from Italy, and I am the first in my family to go to college. And I think that's so very special. It is part of the American dream. I had 3 older brothers, so I was the first female. And so I was therefore rather pampered, spoiled, and protected. And I didn't like the protection part, but that was part of that generation. You protect your daughters, right? And so I had a very nice background growing up. But people have said, did you know you were going to go into politics? Well, I did not know I was going into politics, and I think most people are that way. But I saw a poll recently where members of Congress were interviewed about did they ever show inclination toward public service or public office during their school careers. And I did join a lot of organizations in school. I was the secretary of my class at Boston University. So I guess somewhere along the line, you begin to see in people the fact that they want to serve other people or they want to be in some position where they can do something with regard to leading. So I had a good background. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I know that you married and had 3 children of your own. And then when your sister died of cancer, you also raised her 6 children. You and your husband raised her 6 children. I read that you taught high school and then later college. And I'm wondering what it was like to balance what eventually became a very large family and career.
Well, you know, when we talk about balancing, I think what we're really talking about is satisfaction, you know, and finding satisfaction by deciding on priorities. And so we had priorities. Priorities were health, getting along with each other, education, and helping each other. So maybe I had a lot of excess dust in the corner or on the ceiling, but we learned to kind of turn our head from that. And we worked out teams of who was going to do what for each week, set the table or clear the table or do the laundry. We found doing the laundry didn't work because somebody would say, but my blouse was pink when I gave it to you and now it's a gray. Or I can't find my other sock. So what we did, with the exception of the youngest one, we took them all down to the laundry room and showed them how to use a washer and a dryer. And from then on, and gave them a laundry basket and a hassock. And from then on, they did their own laundry to a degree. And sometimes I must say, the clothes weren't exactly the right color, but that's all right. They got along fine. And I remember the ironing. They would put the ironing in a great big wicker basket. And I didn't have a chance to do any ironing. They didn't really even hardly know how to iron. And I remember it was, I think the Salvation Army called me once and said, do you have any, was it nicely or gently used clothing that you could turn in? And so I found some things for them, and then I saw that laundry basket. This is true. I gave them everything in the laundry basket. And nobody in my family asked for any one of those items. I mean, there's a moral to that. There's a moral to that. And then what I really think I deserve credit for is with all 9 of them, each of them, I took them to the Motor Vehicles Administration to get their licenses. Now that's kind of a step towards sainthood, I think. And here we are. Because there was never a pleasant examiner. They must have hired them because they were grumpy. And so having gone through each one of them, one of them could not make it the first time, or the second time, or the third time. She could not parallel park. The others all made it the first time. What we did is we had 2 cars. First time she used 1 car, it was a station wagon then. And second time, she used another car we had, a Ford. And then third time, we borrowed a car, which was smaller. The 4th time when she made it is in a car they don't make here anymore. It was called a Yugo. Did you ever hear of a Yugo? And so she made it. P.S. with that story, She ended up going to Tufts University and graduating with honors. So I have often said there is a reverse corollary between intelligence and passing that driver's test the first time.
Thank you. So what about, when did you first get into politics, and how did you get into politics?
I actually got into politics through the women's movement. The women's movement was my epiphany. It's when it put the movement into me. And that was back in 1972 when a woman in Congress named Martha Griffiths from Michigan introduced an amendment to the Constitution, 15 words. It was the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment, there was no way that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the bill had to go to the committee first before it could go out on the floor, there was no way that the Judiciary Committee was going to approve it. The chairman of the committee was Emanuel Seller. This was not in his bailiwick. She did something pretty courageous. She got the bill sent from the committee, or rather it bypassed the committee onto the floor directly through what's called a discharge petition. You have to have a majority of the members of Congress to sign on to do that. That's not easy because you're going to alienate the other members of that committee. You're going to alienate other people who don't like the issue or of the other party, but she succeeded. So in 1972, Congress passed the Equal Rights Amendment. It went to the president. The president then was President Nixon. He signed it into law. P.S. at the same year, he signed Title IX of the education amendments, which not only had to do with women in sports, but as we know now in talking about sexual abuse, that Title IX reflects the prohibition for that too. So therefore, commissions for women were being set up throughout the country to try to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed. You needed to have 38 states approve it. So I was on a commission for women in Maryland, and my first job was to try to get Maryland, the legislators, to approve it. We did succeed, but at that time I began to look at the agenda for women in employment, credit, housing, education, and I thought, there's absolutely no equity. We're keeping aside 52% of the population. So then I thought, I want to do something about that if I can, and I decided then to run for my state legislature. So that was my epiphany, the women's movement, but the movement into me.
Okay, fantastic. As I mentioned in my introduction, you have often described yourself as a moderate Republican. Can you say a little bit about how you became a moderate Republican and what that means to be a moderate Republican?
I actually was registered as a Democrat, and I became rather involved a little bit in politics in Maryland when a friend of mine was running for the Senate. His name was Charles Mack Mathias, became a senator. He was in the House first, became a senator. He was kind of what we call the Rockefeller Republican. And so I knew about Rockefeller. I knew about some of the other statesmen in the Congress, Jacob Javits, and the whole litany goes on with these people that I deemed to be moderates. They cared about foreign policy. They cared about fiscal issues, and they worked across the aisle. I consider a moderate somebody who knows that to get the final product of legislation to be what you want, you have to listen to both sides, that you have to listen to another side, and that person has to listen to you, and then you work it out. It is deliberation, it is negotiation, and it is that word compromise, so that you come out with something that both sides can agree with. If we didn't have that, you wouldn't have the Civil Rights Amendment, which took, Lyndon Johnson, he got a pretty good size number of Republicans on the Civil Rights Amendment. You wouldn't have the EPA, which actually came under Nixon, as a matter of fact, Clean Water Act. When you look at our major programs, they didn't happen without having both sides. So moderates, I think, on both sides are those that care about the final product being one where you work together.
Good, good. So As I also mentioned in my introduction, Congresswoman Morella was first elected to Congress in 1987 and served until 2003. Can you take us on a little tour of the Republican Party from the late 80s when you first became a congressperson up until today, if you want to? What do you see as the major turning points in the Republican Party since that time?
I actually, well, when I decided I wanted to be engaged in politics, I wanted a seat at the table, and I felt that if you didn't have a seat at the table, you might be on the menu. And so it would be preferable to be directly involved. And so then I decided to run for the state legislature, and I found out I was in a minority party to begin with, and therefore I had to get the Democrats to actually physically vote for a Republican. And therefore, I went out to meet as many people as I could. I was available so they could learn something about me, what I wanted to do. And that's, again, where I brought my children into the picture, because I knocked on doors. I knocked on doors, and my children had a chant, which was, elect our mother and get her off the streets. But they were there, and I think that's why they're not in politics themselves. They get involved in campaigns, but I think that what they learned then was, we told them it takes a lot of hard work to do that. So I was a minority in my state legislature, but I was on the Appropriations Committee. And I'll tell you one little anecdote that I mentioned the other night. Driving to my subcommittee in Annapolis, which is law enforcement and transportation, on Route 50 going to Annapolis, I was stopped by a state trooper, and he didn't say a word. He was almost like one of those examiners with a license, maybe related. At any rate, he asked for my license. They gave it to him. He took it, and he went to the back and looked at my plate and wrote something down. It said, Maryland House of Delegates, District 16. Then he came, and then he handed me the ticket, and I looked at it, and it was a warning. And I said, thank you, officer. I appreciate it. If I was speeding, I certainly will be more cautious in the future. And he said, I didn't do it for you. I did it for your husband, the delegate. And
Wow.
But what was interesting,
Wow.
I tell this story because it has a happy ending. I went to Annapolis, and it was my law enforcement, transportation, appropriations subcommittee meeting. And so who was there but the top cop, the state superintendent of the police? And he was testifying on his budget. So it was a grand opportunity to tell him about the what was happening with his own department in terms of women, and that I would hope that they would have a personnel policy so that they would recognize, the equity involved. And the police superintendent promised to do that, but the committee also made statements and said, and we will make sure that this is monitored. So time wounds, all heals, and I don't think it's happened since then. Now, this was a while ago.
Yes.
So, I must say it, I wouldn't think it would happen now.
Yes.
Okay, so then from the state legislature, where we were able to accomplish a great deal, again, working across the aisle, I was very much in a minority there. I ran for the federal House of Representatives. I was successful. That's another story, but I was successful. And your question is, what happened to the Republican Party?
Well, just to take us on a little
Yeah,
tour.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I was in a very competitive district. When you're in a competitive district, you reach out. The Democrats would come to me, would you get on my bill? The Republicans, I would go to them, would you get on my bill? Because the ideal thing was, when you put in a piece of legislation, you want to show both sides approve of it. It's a good launching for the legislation. And so I was quite successful. I served with 2 years with Ronald Reagan, and then with George Bush, 41, and then for 4 years, and then with with Clinton. With Clinton. And with Clinton, I would be at the White House often, whether it was certain kinds of legislation that he wanted to show that he also had Republicans that supported it too. And I was quite successful with a lot of pieces of legislation by working across the aisle. When you have a competitive district, you're not going to please everybody, but you're going to have to make sure that you know why you did something and that you demonstrate to them the reason and your openness and your trustworthiness. What happened to the Republican Party? For 8 years, I was a minority in the minority. And then the Republicans became the majority. So for 8 years, I was a minority in the majority. When did the change occur? It had been occurring a little bit, but it was mostly, I think, 1994 was a very critical year. That was the year when Newt Gingrich became the Speaker of the House. That was the year we had the shutdown, the government shutdown. I represented a lot of federal employees. I thought there will never be another shutdown. I was asked before the last shutdown, will it happen? I said, no. They'll kick the can down the road, but there won't be a shutdown. But I was so wrong. But then I looked at the figures, and only 37 members of Congress were serving during the previous shutdown. So they did not have the experience or the background. I'll give you, to demonstrate that the Republican Party was beginning to move in a more polarized fashion, a man who was Speaker of the House, Tom Foley. Tom Foley was Speaker for many, many years, and he was defeated as Speaker. And he and Bob Michael was the minority leader, and he decided he was going to leave after many, many years also. At the funeral of Tom Foley last year, Bob Michael, President Obama was there, President Clinton was there, Joe Biden was there, and the person who made a comment, who got a standing ovation, was Bob Michael. Bob Michael got the ovation because he said during our years there together, every week we would meet at each other's office. 1 week it would be my office, 1 week it would be the Speaker's office, and we would talk about issues. We disagreed, but we talk about it and how we were going to present it. He said, and when Speaker Foley gave his farewell speech on the House floor, he called me, he called the minority leader, called him up to preside during the proceedings. This was reflective of bipartisanship, a bipartisan spirit. You didn't have to agree. And then it began to leave. So Bob Michael is still around, and we still love him for the fact that he worked with Tip O'Neill, he worked with Speaker Foley, he worked with others, and he represented that facet. After that, redistricting entered the picture. I'm going to be talking about that kind of thing tomorrow, but redistricting every 10 years, when you put it in the hands of the governor and the state legislators, they're going to define their districts according to how it's going to help them, help their party. You know, the redistricting is gerrymandering. You know gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is not new. It actually came from Governor Geary, G-E-R-R-Y of Massachusetts. And when he was doing his designing pretty much of the districts in Massachusetts, in order to help his party, he designed a district which was like a salamander. So hence we get the word gerrymander. Well, it's gerrymandering now beyond what it ever was before. So we have more safe districts. We have very few. We have probably like 15% of districts that are not safe districts in Congress.
Can you explain, just define safe district?
Yeah, I will. Every 10 years, according to the census, we must look at the population of the entire country, whether they're citizens or not. At the same, you do that for economic reasons, education, et cetera. But at the same time, there is a mandate that you will reapportion your federal legislature and your state legislature according to your population shifts. Because we can only have 435 members of the House. Therefore, if one state is bursting with the population, maybe they deserve another member if they have like an extra 700,000 people. And maybe if the state has gotten smaller, maybe a member should be taken from them. So that redistricting, the state is told how many districts they can have within their state, and maybe they add one, maybe they subtract one, but then the design of the district, which should be about between 600,000 and 700,000, very slightly, per district, is done by the state legislature and the governor. So therefore, they play their dramatic games of saying, well, no, let me see, this side of the street is mostly Democratic. We'll draw a line here. And the other side, well, they have some Democrats, but not that many, so we'll give it to them. And in fact, I can tell you that my state of Maryland, this past election with this past redistricting, has one district of the 8, we have 8 members of the House, one district that is considered the second worst in the country, 435, and that is the second worst. The first one I think is North Carolina. But it looks like a blot of blood is taken from somebody and thrown on a board, and it splatters. It's absolutely fantastic. Maybe some people think it's artistic, but it is really scary. Wow. So, because what it does, it takes community, continuity, contiguousness away from the whole dimension, of redistricting. Okay. So I think, if I can get into a belief, I have a strong belief, and that is I think state legislatures should be mandated to establish nonpartisan committees to do their redistricting. Along with that, to have public hearings so the public know what's going on too. And I think you would find then that there'd be a little more objectivity. So, okay, so if I have this district designed to be Republican, red, then who's going to elect the person, that person? That person is going to be elected by the primary voter, the person who votes in the primary. How many vote in a primary? So small. In my state of Maryland, probably not more than 23%. Appalling to vote in a primary. So therefore, that primary becomes the new November, the person elected in the primary. Now, these members who represent, let's say, Tea Party, I don't know whether people who consider themselves Tea Partiers or not, it doesn't matter, but they are representing their district. They are representing the people who voted for them in their so-called safe district. And so I think that indeed it should be much more objective. Several states have done that. California has done that, and there are some other states that have too. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think we should. League of Women Voters has been pushing it. AAUW has been pushing it. Okay.
So I want to turn to some specific issues.
Good.
I know that you voted against the majority of your party on a whole variety of issues, including abortion, gun control, gay rights, use of force in Iraq in both 1991 and 2002. How did you work within the Republican Party on those issues? How did you work with Democrats on those issues? How did that work? Or not work?
That was not easy. I think the bottom line, I think, is if you can be respected by your colleagues. I mean, if they know I'm not playing any games, that I'm hardworking, that I don't go out and flaunt it well in advance. When I voted against Iraq, I didn't let the press know in advance because I did not want them to single me out and say, see, we have a Republican here that's going to vote that way, and et cetera. In fact, my staff weren't even sure what I was going to do. I don't think my husband did either. And I voted against the impeachment. I made a statement about the fact that I felt it was perjurious. Clinton had lied, but it did not imperil the nation, and we needed to move on. We couldn't get him enmeshed with that. And a number of other, well, you mentioned some of the social issues. I frankly think that the political parties should stay out of the bedroom. I mean, I really think there are some things that are private they should stay away from. There are some laws we already have. I don't know why I think they should be concerned with budgetary issues, with the economy, with jobs. And so I vote the way I think on those issues. I am a renegade. I am a maverick. But I must say, I never had trouble getting along with the members of my party, even though they may not have liked the way I voted.
So how did you do that?
How did I do it?
Yeah, how did you do that?
I really think it's developing, it gets back to politics is about people. It's about developing kind of a trust from the people that you represent. And I knew the people quite well, and they knew me. They knew where I lived. Charlie Cook, who does the Cook Political Report even now, is a former constituent, and he said that Morella, she knows her district. She will go to the opening of an envelope. I went to an opening of a lot of envelopes, on weekends too, so I must say my family did suffer to a degree in terms of my lack of presence. Or sometimes when I would take them with me, nobody would look to them, they'd look to me. So again, they were kind of being ignored, which is another one of the things that occurs with regard to, as you suggested earlier, balancing. So I just think it was trust. I think it was hard work. They knew where I came from. I'll tell you an interesting story about George Bush, 43. When my last election, I was raising money, always raising money. It's one of the problems with the system. And my advisors had said, President Bush would be willing to come into Montgomery County, Maryland. We're right next to the District of Columbia. We'll come into Montgomery County, Maryland, and do a fundraiser for you. And you know, we could pull in a lot of money on that. And I said, I don't need my liberal press to have George Bush coming in for me, because then my opponent will put my face on George Bush and say she's a clone, even though I'm not. She's a clone. And then a few weeks later, I thought about it again. And I thought, I think I need the money. So we invited him, and I had my fingers crossed. And he got there, and he said, you know, she's a good member of Congress. I just wish she'd vote with me once in a while. Perfect. And then he said, and I understand she used to teach English. And there are those people who think I should be taking lessons from her. And so it went that way. I mean, it was just great, which says something about understanding your audience, too, and understanding why you're there and what you really want to do. An interesting thing is that the night of the election, when I had a perfect election, everything. I had newspaper endorsements, I had all the money I needed, I had people. I had a new district, though, or part of it was a new district, and I didn't win. And that night, I was on television greeting my well wishers and my hard workers, and I got a phone call while I am talking to them and the press. Gordon Peterson was Channel 9, our big CBS channel, and he was there, and it was President Bush calling me. Mm-hmm. It had been planned. It had been planned about what time his people had called and said, what time should the president call? But I thought that was a very nice gesture. The next day I was in my campaign office preparing my thank you notes, and there was just one volunteer there with me. And at 4 p.m, I got a telephone call. I picked up the phone, and it was President Bush 41, his father, had called. And I thought, what a nice family. Whether you agree with them or not, these are people that cared about people. So I've never forgotten that. It's always been very special. So I just think if you do your homework and you respect people. George Washington, when he was age 15, wrote Rules for Civility and Decent Behavior. That's what it was called. Came from the French or something. And the first rule was, when in the company of others, act like you should respect those who are present. And I guess if we could put it into contemporary terms, you're just saying respect others. And I firmly believe that if you respect others and you listen and you learn, and you lead. And I'm simplifying it, but so I got along fine.
Thank you.
Got along fine. Mm-hmm.
I have one.
I didn't get on the Appropriations Committee. Yeah. but I got on committees I liked. I was on science. I was able to help my federal employees, and technology. Yeah, you all be interested in my science committee work, and able to do the caucuses that I was very interested in. But when I said appropriations, since I'd done that in the state, they said, "Oh, Connie, it would really hurt you in your district because you would have to vote for some horrendous things and it would hurt you." Baloney. I would have been a thorn, you know, and I think they didn't want to take the chance.
They just wanted to keep you out, yeah.
But I still got the things I wanted, yeah.
So actually, you gave me a nice segue. My last question, and then I want to open it up to the audience for your questions, has to do with your work on the House Committee on Science. Can you say a little bit about that, how you ended up on that committee and what you did on that committee?
Well, actually, I liked the committee. It obviously dealt with NASA, dealt with technology, and I represented the National Institutes of Health. I represented the National Institute of Standards and Technology, Food and Drug Administration, Walter Reed National Naval Medical Center, which is what it was called then, and a number of other of our very substantial institutions that dealt with scientific technology. I mean, NIST had a number of Nobel laureates that were there. And so I became kind of their guardian, and also working with my federal workforce as they were. I got an award for my technology transfer from the private sector, the public sector to the private sector legislation. And I just felt that it was such that it was going to help our economy, help our region, and show the kind of recognition that our federal employees who are the scientists should have. I also had a biotech corridor. I had a corridor where, of course, you had your companies, biotech companies were all located too. So it fit in very well. And you are interested in that piece of legislation that you mentioned. Yeah. The Committee for the Advancement of Women and Minorities and People with Disabilities in Science, Engineering, and Technology. And that did pass. I do want to tell you about one of the horrendous rules. See, each house has its own rules. One of the horrendous rules that the Senate has, they're changing it slightly. Any senator can pull a bill out before it's considered, and let's say a bill from the House that goes to the Senate, anonymously. And the first year I had that in, it passed the House, went over to the Senate, and it disappeared. What happened? It was pulled by a senator. I couldn't figure out who it was, and I finally found out, and he had already gone home to his district. It was Malcolm Wallop. The guy is dead now, so. and I reintroduced the bill, and it passed, and a very lustrous committee was set up, and they came up with some wonderful recommendations. Are they all being followed? We know some of them are. We know the others are still very relevant. Yeah. We still, and here at Clarkson, you know, you are an engineering limelight, and I hope that we're getting more women involved, as well as minorities in science, engineering, and technology. We call it STEM, don't we? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. First of all, let's give a round of applause to Congresswoman Morella. And now what I'd like to do is open this up to your questions. Alan Shea is in the back with a microphone and can bring the microphone to you if you just want to raise your hand, so we can get questions from the audience for Congresswoman Morella.
You can ask questions about anything you'd like to ask. I just don't have to answer them.
Okay. About right here.
The author.
Two questions into one. Okay, my first question is, what do you think personally are the most important issues in America today that Congress could do something about?
Okay. The most important? It's hard to say the two most important because there are a whole series of issues that they need to do something about. Number one, they've got to get a budget passed. Right now, they're working on continuing resolutions. They continue and continue. December 11th is the deadline for the budget. They've talked about another shutdown, but it won't happen. Even John Boehner says that there will not be a shutdown. But they have to have regular order. In 2003, they had a bill which was kept open on the floor of the House for a vote for 3 hours. That's just indicative. It was on a Medicare bill. That's just indicative of how they can play around with it if they don't have a regular order plan. I think immigration is another issue that both sides have got to come together on. They have had legislation, and then, that both sides were sponsoring, and then suddenly it disappeared and there becomes the polarization. I think tax policy is another one. I think we've got a number of companies that are going over, changing their headquarters because of this tax inversion. And so something needs to be done about corporate taxes. I think, and of course, with regard to the environment, President Obama has said that he has signed a pact with the Chinese president in terms of climate change. Let's hope that works. So I think, when people voted, they had no confidence in their government, no confidence in their representatives. And what they really want, I think, they want a viable economy. They want jobs. They want the people outside of Clarkson and St. Lawrence University to have some economic vitality, to be able to have their kids have a job after they finish college, or have a chance to go to college. One of the things I am concerned about is the heavy burden of student loans on young people. Whereas when I was in college, you would think about someday getting married and buying a house. You think of your mortgage. Right now, some of the young people, when they get married, are going to worry about how they're going to pay off their student loans. I think there should be a program where more assistance is given. It can't be one-dimensional, but more assistance is given to people with regard to education. Because I think education, I think you're getting at that sort of, education is the key. It's a key to vitality, to growth, entrepreneurship, innovation.
Would you dare say anything about health care?
Oh, of course. Well, naturally, healthcare.
That was sort of a joke.
Well, I know. But that's it. We joke about it.
Should we just get over
but
it
actually,
and fix up?
Well, I think if you're asking about Congress, what Congress has to do.
And that was my other question. It was going to be, what do you think would bring about a spirit of compromise into today's Congress? Is it possible?
If the members of Congress, first of all, with regard to health care, what they need to do is forget abolishing Obamacare or Affordable Care Act. Forget it. But make some adjustments.
Yes.
And I think there are a number of adjustments that we know could be made, should be made, and I think that's what they should do. So now your question is, what?
Oh, okay, I
What?
had one more.
Now repeat that
topic.
last one, because I never answered it. Repeat your last question.
About the spirit of cooperation and
Oh,
compromise.
okay.
What would you-
What do you think could bring about a spirit of compromise into today's Congress?
Let's see.
Is there anything?
Do you have we could pray.
Well, we're all doing that. We do that every Sunday.
I know.
We do.
Members of Congress have got to realize that they're representing the country. I love Congress. I love the institution. I am a political junkie. I feel as a political junkie, I have a responsibility to assist my Congress, to not lower it, but to help it improve to be what I want it to be and what it should be. And right now, the center has fallen apart. And when the center goes, it's very hard to get both sides to work together. I think we'll see what happens, my prediction, we'll see what happens in the next 2 years. I think 2015 and 2014, 15 and 16 are critical. 2016, I think is going to be a big difference. If the Republicans don't perform, don't show they can accomplish something now that they have the majority, then I think you're going to have a complete change in 2016. See, the Democrats haven't performed, and I think that's one of the reasons why people just voted Republican. So now they have a chance to do it, and that's not going to be easy because they're going to have to begin to work together. I'm going to talk tomorrow night about what I think should be done, so come tomorrow night. But I'm going to talk about gerrymandering,
You're going
the
to
money.
St. Lawrence?
Yeah, gerrymandering, the money situation, they don't know each other, you know, all of those kinds of things that contribute toward polarization. Why do we need to bother with you? I don't need you. I'm safe. I've got my Republican or my Democratic voters in the primary, so why bother?
And my last question.
Actually, let's give other people a chance and then come back if we've got some time, okay?
Just this real quick one. American University School of Public Affairs, where is it and who goes to school there?
I do. No, I teach there. Actually,
Is it in Washington?
oh yeah, it's part of American University. American University has a number of divisions, and one of them is the School of Public Affairs, and that's where you have, they have a leadership council on the congressional and presidential studies. And yeah, I teach just a weekend course on women in politics and public policy. And so it's through the School of it's the School of Public Affairs. There's also,
Thanks.
I'll make my answers shorter. It's hard to,
no,
though.
that's good.
I also have a couple questions. The first one will be very short. You just alluded to that members of Congress don't know each other. And it seems that people aren't moving to Washington the way they used to. How much is that part of it?
I couldn't agree with you more.
Okay.
That's another one of the recommendations. You have a four-day week. In fact, you have less than that because they go back on Thursdays. They come back late on Mondays. Sometimes they come back Tuesday morning. They have their families and their constituents back home, so they don't have that much time. They've got committees, they've got subcommittees, they've got constituents here. They're out raising money for their party and for themselves. And so they are so isolated with their own party and their own committee, and there's no need for them to go get somebody to get on their piece of legislation. So they don't know each other. One of the things they did on the House is they got rid of the PAGE program on the House. PAGE program had high school kids who got great experience. Some of them even went on to run for Congress. And they terminated it for financial reasons, they said. The Senate kept them. The Senate has pages. The House does not. Those pages had to memorize the faces and names of every member on their side of the aisle. And I have seen members of Congress, particularly toward the end, go over to a page in the chamber and say, who's that talking? Who's that talking? So when you don't, so I think leadership has a role to play also in making them come together with bipartisan briefings and social gatherings so they know so-and-so has a kid who is graduating with honors from some college or high school or something. Once you know somebody, you can disagree, but you won't be disagreeable about it. You'll be civil. And that's how you forge compromises. I just got back from Rome. I chair something called the Franklin Center that does interglobal trips for members of Congress. And the day after the election, we took 16 members of Congress, divided, Democrat, Republican, to Rome, and they had meetings on security, on finance, on environment, immigration, etc. But they got to know each other. And I kind of watched this, and I thought, they were joking with each other, they were disagreeing, but, and I know when they went back, they had spouses with them too. I know that when they went back, from that time on the floor of the House or in committee, they'll stop and chuckle and talk to each other. They may not vote alike, but they will at least have that sense of camaraderie. Yeah, so you're right. They should do something about it.
Okay, and
Maybe give them 3 weeks of session, continuous session, and 1 week back in their district. It's another possibility.
Also, I have the feeling that most people in the United States are interested in the sort of moderate Congress members that you are describing yourself to have been. And I'm wondering what you think about open primaries. I don't know what the number is in New York State, but certainly there's a very large number of people who have voters who have not been willing to choose a political party. We call them blanks. And so with the political parties and only the registered members choosing the candidates, it seems as if we tend to get the extremes of each party as the choices available. What is your feeling about open primaries?
I think there should be. Absolutely. There should be open primaries. California was the most recent state to have the open primary. I mean, if you do not want to affiliate with either the Republican or the Democratic Party, and on the primary, which I'd say is the most important election, you show up, you can't vote in most states. You cannot vote. Why can't I vote? You're a decline. You declined to affiliate. And so you are disenfranchised. And as a Republican, if I wanted to vote for a Democrat for, let's say, Attorney General, I show up and I can't get that ballot. And a Democrat who might want to vote for it can't do that. So I really do think that there should be open primaries. I don't know that they make a big difference, but they'd make some kind of a difference. They're worth trying. You know.
Thank you.
California does a crazy thing. I say crazy because I'm not sure I go along with that. They have the open primary, but on the general election ballot are the top 2 vote getters. And they may be of the same party. And that happened this last election. In California, you had Howard Berman and Brad Sherman. So it was the Berman-Sherman. and both of them were Democrats. And in the general election ballot, they're the ones on the ballot. And Sherman won. Sherman's last stand.
Other questions from the audience?
And don't be afraid. I mean, how about some of the students up there? What do you want to know, too? I mean, after you.
Good.
Well, why don't you go with these two, and then we'll get some of the students to.
Good.
Actually, what I want to ask about does affect the students. You're a woman who ran for office in your later years. You didn't start out, you had your family and your career, and then you ran for office. What advice would you give to young women about getting into the political process earlier than a lot of women do who do wait until after they have their families and their careers are pretty much concluded?
Some of them are beginning to get in earlier. Like, for the first time, you've got women members of Congress that have had 1, 2, 3 children while they were members of Congress. I mean, that didn't used to happen before. You wouldn't be pregnant while you were running for Congress or when you were first elected. But I think in general, just plain getting women willing to run is become very difficult, and it really shouldn't. And there have been some studies done. One of the studies was done by Jennifer Lawless from the School of Public Affairs and Richard Fox together on why women don't run. And the answer is they don't run because they have no confidence. They think they need 45 PhD degrees. They have nobody in their party encouraging them. You know, there's no support there saying, you know, it might be good for us to look at some of the women that we have out there or to do some affirmative action, you know, to get more women involved. And then, of course, it's not family either. That's what's so interesting. Then they look at the negative campaigning that takes place, and they think, I don't know whether I want to subject myself or my family to that kind of thing. And they think about the money. When I said it's not the family, another study was done which said that when they talked to women, it wasn't really their family that was what triggered them not running. It was really not, which I would think that would have been a consideration. But that was not the case in a very extensive poll that was done. Those same 2 people did another report that came out last year, why women still don't run, with the very same reasons, So what does it say? It says we all have to encourage these women to know they can do it and to take a chance. And looking at my own career, they're not going to win it all. They're going to be losses, but you can never gain if you don't lose. And I cite that you had Lincoln and Obama, Clinton, Bush, Teddy Roosevelt. All of them have lost elections. I could go on with a long list of people who have lost but who have run again. And so no guts, no glory. Yeah? So we've got to encourage women and maybe try to mentor them. And frankly, you know, when I think about it, some of my mentors actually were men. You know, men whom I knew said, you know, Connie, you really should do that. You really should go after the Chamber of Commerce or whatever. Women definitely were there, and they were there helping me in campaign offices and whatever. But I'm saying that also there were men too. Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Students? Questions? Question over here.
Congressman, I'm falling apart here. But my question is, just as a working man that went to a 2-year college and a family, a beautiful family, and my kids are all shook up over politics and everything else. And I tell them, well, kids, it's not so much the politics, it's the energy. I mean, this domestic oil production. We've been hearing about much of the manufacturing, at least 20 or 30% being sent overseas, that in the next 5 years, it's going to come back to the U.S. Being in science and technology, can you help us with this? Is, what we see and what we hear on TV, what's fact and what is fiction?
I'm sure there's a course offered in that. I don't know. Let me ask you, what do you think about the Keystone XL pipeline? Should that be one of the issues on the agenda of the Congress? I think it's going to be, but I mean, what do you think about it?
Well, you're right.
Isn't that clever? You notice what I did?
No. Okay, I'll give you a quick answer. I'm a railroad enthusiast, railroad historian, and the American railroads have ordered over 15,000 new tank cars across the nation to handle the oil. We're bringing 44 tank cars of crude oil through New York State, and it goes down into your area of Maryland. Do we need the Keystone pipeline? Let's leave it up to the oil people. Let's leave it up to National Grid and private industry to decide what Enbridge, the largest eastern oil pipeline system, they have connected old pipelines together out into the Balkans and that area. So no, do we need the Keystone? I don't know if we do or we don't, but from what I've listened to our president on is that he's trying to take credit for this domestic oil production. And I understand that the technology for it came from the United States Navy.
You mean the fracking?
The fracking, yes.
Yeah, the natural gas.
And I've talked to people involved in fracking, and they say there's, it's not as bad as it looks. And I said, yes, except that when you guys make a mistake, it's a big mistake. And it's like a railroad train accident. When there's an accident, it's nothing but big. There's nothing small about a train accident. But no, I don't, the world's going to go on, whether we have the Keystone pipeline or not. And, but I think you're going to see oil being shipped through the Great Lakes system. It's going to affect St. Lawrence County. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, well, I've said enough.
No, but I agree with you too about the fracking. It seems to me that the tests have indicated that environmentally that it's sound, but all you need is an error. An error, and so I think we should guard against it. It's very interesting, particularly when you look at Germany is going anti-nuclear, Japan anti-nuclear, France goes along selling its electricity. It's like 80%, electrical in that country. And then you look at Germany and Russia, in terms of the energy. It's a very complicated issue, and we just better get a hold on it moment by moment.
I think we have time for one more question, if there's one more question in the audience.
I'd like to have one of the students say something, maybe why they picked Clarkson or why it's so special.
Two people.
Okay.
Good. Let's take them both.
That would be great, good.
Jenna, let's start with her. And then,
I'm a body image activist, and it's something that means something dear to my heart. And I was just wondering, in your time in Congress, were there any pivotal moments where you experienced scrutiny from the media or popular culture because you were a woman?
I'm going to repeat her.
Yeah, she was saying that she's a body image activist.
Yeah.
This is Jenna Boss, who,
She's what kind of an activist?
body image activist.
Oh, but
And that she wonders if there were any pivotal moments while you were in Congress where you were scrutinized, particularly scrutinized by the media, by popular culture, because you were female.
Well, I do remember that my chief of staff once came into my office and he was very upset. He said, "I don't believe the press called me and they wanted to know what kind of shoes you wear." And I said, "Well, what did you say?" He said, "I said stylish and sturdy." I said, "Well, I said, "That was good." So would I get scrutinized? Oh, yes. I've had people say, I really think I didn't like your earrings, or you have a new hairdo, don't you? Or things of that nature. Is that sort of what you mean?
Yeah. I think it's in the
Yeah,
research
but, you
that
know,
I've done.
but more, they used to do that more with women than they do now. Now they're doing some of it with men, finally. But it used to be with a woman. I remember a woman running in Maryland, who remained nameless, and they said she was the short, roly-poly, feisty. But they never said anything about the paunch that the guy running against her had, which was totally unfair. And I do think, maybe Hillary Clinton has had people looking very closely at her, always wearing pants or, her hairdo or whatever. But they're beginning to look a little bit at men, and they're becoming a little more conscious with regard to scrutinizing women in terms of, as you would say, body image.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And since there were two students who raised hands,
Yeah,
I think we
okay.
should take the other student too.
Absolutely.
And then we'll end there.
Hi, I was just wondering how you felt towards the immigration policy that Obama just passed a couple months ago, I believe.
The question is about the immigration policy from President Obama.
Yeah, I know he's frustrated. I know he's frustrated because as I say, there have been some immigration bills that have been bipartisan and they have just gone by the wayside. However, I don't know that I agree with his timing. I think what President Obama should do is he should be back and forth with Congress constantly. Invite them to the White House, go to Congress. Invite them to the White House, go to Congress. Back and forth to the point where he hounds them. And I would submit they would be able to from that, to get some element that Congress would agree with. I just think he may think his issue is correct, and maybe it is correct, but you cannot avoid and eliminate Congress. Now, the Democrats will probably not show that they're upset, but they're upset too, because this is the first branch of government, is the legislative branch, and we believe in checks and balances. And so I think his timing and flaunting it is just like what Senator McConnell has said. It's like him bringing a red flag in front of a bull. So you're going to see more repercussions of that. And sometimes if we act more diplomatically, we can do a heck of a lot more. We have more power than we think we have. We haven't talked about OECD. You didn't ask me any questions about it. That was from Marshall's Family of Nations, the speech he gave where we help Europe. And at any rate, I love George Marshall. And George Marshall said, lead quietly, lead listening. And he was able to accomplish a great deal. And there's another thing I do. When I was in Paris, I spoke at a number of our American cemeteries, on Memorial Day and what they called Armistice Day, which we called Veterans Day. And I became aware of our beautiful cemeteries and what they represented. the American flag and then the flag of the nation. We have 25 of them. 14 of them are in France, and they are guarded by the American Battle Monuments Commission. Well, I asked the president if I could become a member, and I was lucky. I had some assistance in Congress, and I became a member. So I was at D-Day's 70th anniversary this June, been to many of our cemeteries that we have overseas. On Memorial Day, I'm going to be going to some in the Netherlands. They are beautiful, beautiful grounds which remind the people in those countries of the fact that lives had been taken from mostly young people for their freedom. And there is a movement which started with a cemetery in the Netherlands where the people have adopted a grave. Every grave in that cemetery has adopted parents who are the natives in that town. What they've done is they've compiled booklets with history of the family, of the deceased. They've tried to communicate with any, living relatives of the family, and they watch that grave. It's kind of a nice sort of, with all these things happening, a nice sort of remembrance of what the Battle Monuments Commission stands for, which came from Pershing, who was the founder. Time will not dim the glory of their deeds. And it's a good point at which to end, isn't it? Okay. Thank you all very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Congresswoman Morella, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
You agree. I didn't know whether to look at them or look at you, and you could tell I was kind of like,